As members of the free world, we love our rights and we have lots of them, or so we think. We live happily in the illusion of those rights, unbothered by what's out of reach until it is, especially when it comes to how we leave this world. I'm talking about being the author of your own death, the autonomy to end with dignity over suffering. In 2016, the Canadian government passed the C-14 bill, allowing some individuals to have assistance from a medical practitioner in ending their own life. And although this bill clears the path, it doesn't mean the road isn't bumpy. My next guest is the founder of a nonprofit called Bridge C14, a network of peer to peer connections and community supports through all stages of medical assistance in dying, known as Maid. She is also someone with firsthand experience with how the laws and the stigmas impact the loved ones who decide to have a Maid death. Today, she's going to share her story, the logistics, and explore the stigma as we ask the question, who has the right to die? Advocating and adapting, grieving and thriving, all around impact maker Jan Ditchfield. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Meredith.
I feel like this topic is in the center of those really important yet taboo questions that we ask ourselves but are afraid to have in our Google search history.
I think that would be a very accurate way to introduce the topic.
I would love to kick things off with a philosophical question. We're recording this in the month of October, and I just wonder what it is about our society that we are interested enough in the topic of death that our purchases can support Halloween City, right? But not enough that we can talk to one another about it.
That's a really deep question. For me, I think a lot of the conversation goes back to when you asked the question earlier, like, who has the right to die? And it's like, well, I believe we all have the right to die. It's just that not all of us are ready to die. And maybe that's what it comes down to with the same conversation, that it's easy to dress up in kind of Halloween and pretend play and have all of these great discussions and fun ideas around the idea of death until it actually is on your doorstep. And then it's a very different conversation when it's become a reality and it isn't something that's so foreign and so out of reach. And I think all of us, when we think about our death, it's final. There's something very finite about that. And it also really forces us to have to think about our living. And those of us, I think, maybe who haven't necessarily been super happy with the living process, it's not as comfortable to think about the dying process.
Wow. Yeah, that's so true. I would hope that people would want to kind of normalize these conversations, but you're right. It's not just as easy as let's normalize preparing for our own deaths and the deaths of our loved ones because it's how much regret do I have? It's like a Pandora's box of decisions that you made, decisions that you didn't make, things that are unsaid. And then you have to confront that you still have time to say them, but are you going to? You can't shrug and just move on with your life. You really have to be present in the living. There's a lot there.
Yeah, there is a lot there. It's interesting because I was watching a documentary this weekend. Are you familiar with Mr. Dressup? I don't know if a big name in the States. So he is a hero in Canada, a childhood hero in Canada, and he was friends with Mr. Rogers. So they both started at the same time, and Mr. Dressup became the Canadian version of Mr. Rogers. And he passed away a few years ago, and it was interesting watching the documentary because I was thinking about it and thinking about our conversation. Is that we spend a lot of time, again, thinking about the things that we do in life and reflecting back on that. But when it comes to time for us to die, we don't take time to think about the reflections of death, and we get very fixated on how the death process is going to happen instead of thinking so much about how the living process should be happening. And so, does it really matter how we end up dying? And is it really should be the focus more on how we're living? Which really is ultimately what brought Maid into consideration, is to help people who were living in a state that was not fair or humane, to help them have choices on how they wanted to leave.
Gosh, yes, you're so right. Because we judge people for how they leave this life. But when it comes to the life that they lived, that shit gets sugar coated. because as I've said in other episodes, reflecting on grief, the racist uncle, he's just quirky. The really mean auntie, she was just a spitfire. Like, it's like we romanticize their memory unless their death was something that was taboo. And that's again, yeah, where this maid idea comes in. And I wanted to talk about the different types of euthanasia, passive and active, because as I explored this topic in preparation for our discussion, I realized that medically assisted death was way closer than I thought it was.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are kind of surprised about it when we start really unpacking what it means. I've lost two parents now. I've lost one parent that died, quote unquote, naturally, and another parent from cancer, and then another parent who died through the Maid process. And going through those two processes, which are very, very difficult. When my dad died, it really was a matter of people just upping morphine a little bit. Doctors, a little bit more morphine, a little bit more. We make them comfortable. I think everyone has heard that conversation in the hospital at some point. And there's other ways as well to go about it, which includes, not allowing people to have access to food, water, letting people starve to death, just so that like nature, again, I'm going to put air quotes around that, can take its course. So this has been on our doorstep for years, and it is on our doorstep. It's legal in Canada and it's legal in other parts of the world, but it's been there the whole time. It's just something that we were able to turn a blind eye to.
Never thought of giving more morphine as killing a person, because what do I know? It's just not a part of my like daily thoughts, right? And I had heard and have been in hospital rooms where they have discussed this option. Like, let's just give them more morphine, make them comfortable. But it actually does, like, it kills them, the morphine.
Well, I think using the term killing isn't the right term to use. I'm just going to push back on that one
Yeah,
politely a
please do.
bit.
Because
Yeah,
as soon as
yeah.
it came out of my mouth, I'm like,
Yeah,
that didn't
that's not
sound
right.
good.
Yeah,
Thank
no.
you for your grace.
Yeah, no. It's really what it is it's just helping to speed up the death process. That's what it is. So
Hmm.
it is the same as when someone has more morphine put into them. It's going to accelerate what that outcome already was going to be. And it's no different than Maid. And Maid is, there is a very finite outcome that's going to be happening in someone's life. And the facilitation of Maid is just speeding it up so we can skip over some of those truly horrible parts of someone's death.
Because when you think about it, withholding food and water, that is horrible. And we just have different verbiage that we hide behind psychologically as the living, right? And so it's so much harder to not hide behind that and to face these decisions with honesty, which is what I appreciate so much about your approach, is the decisiveness and the honesty that you bring to it. What did you think about the topic of medically assisted death prior to the bill being passed?
I would say that it was something that I gave a lot of thought to. I think when the bill it came into to existence in Canada, for me, it was just kind of well, that makes sense. I think I approached it that way in a lot of ways. I've worked in the nonprofit world almost my entire career, and I worked in human rights for the majority of it. So for me, it was like, this is a human rights issue more than anything else, and it just makes sense to allow someone to have autonomy over their death, just as much as I want someone to have autonomy over their life decisions. It changed though, and it was actually at my doorstep. So I think having to look at something from a reflective point of view, I always say we get to pontificate an awful lot about things that we think we know so much about until we have to face it. And when it actually arrives in our backyard and our front door, wherever it shows up, it's a very different process when it's you having to navigate something versus you just giving an opinion on something that you don't actually know anything about personally.
What was that process like for you? Tell me the story of your Maid experience.
So my mom was one of the first people in our region to receive Maid. She received Maid in 2016 in October, so we are just past her the anniversary of that death as well. And she was an amazing human being, like one of the most remarkable women I've ever met in my life, full of piss and vinegar. She was just the one that would, if you just told her you couldn't do it, she'd be like, watch me, I'm going to go and do it. So, but she ended up being diagnosed with a very rare brain disease called progressive supranuclear palsy. And it's extremely rare. Nobody knows why you get it. There's no cure for it. And it is a very cruel disease. And so from the moment of the diagnosis to her death was only 19 months. And
Oh,
in
wow.
that time span, it robbed her of everything. So it took her from her ability to walk, to talk, to communicate. Everything just shut down on her, except for the fact that her brain still continued to be receptive. It just was nothing expressive could happen. So she was living in a body that just didn't want to do what it was supposed to do. And watching her go through that process was heartbreaking. And she was the one who came to me and said, I am ready to go and I want you to help me. And that's what started our Maid process.
And did you know that the bill had been passed prior to her sharing that with you?
Yes, I did know. And it was interesting with the conversation because when we had the conversation and she was trying to start thinking about what are my options, and it was a really easily, I was like, well, it's legal, mom. We have legal options. We can find the way for you to be able to leave on your own terms without having to worry about is anyone going to get in trouble, or is there going to be stories told, or is somebody going to have to do something they don't want to do. It freed us up for a very different conversation.
And you had to have a lot of those, a lot of conversations before because, so many families default into these conveyor belts, I guess you might say, of non-decisions. Like a non-decision is a decision, but sometimes when confronted with these more heart-tugging decisions, it becomes less of an easy process. What were some of the conversations and decisions that you had to make in the Maid process?
I'm glad you asked this question because I think a lot of the time when people think about Maid, we think a lot that well, it must be just very easy. You walk into a doctor's office and you make a request and poof, it's over. And it's not like that. It's a very long process to go through. For us, it was 90 days. So it was 90 days of conversations. So from the moment that my mother said, "This is what I want to do," and I said, "Are you sure?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "All right, I'm on it. Let's figure this out." It was 90 days of conversations with everybody, like everybody. You have to talk to doctors, you have to get multiple assessments. My mother wanted to have an in home process as well. So that was also a completely different navigation point because it hadn't been done up until in where our region where we lived up until my mom. So that became something different of we don't have to take it out of the hospital, bring it into the house. There were conversations I had to have with psychologists and with nurses and with caregivers and with my own family. And it just was a never ending series of conversations over those 90 days.
When you talk about assessments, so you had to hire a psychologist, a nurse, a doctor. Am I missing anyone?
So I was told I had to do that, and in fact, I didn't have to do that. So that's
Okay.
what we're yeah. So the process was really muddy. I'll be really honest. I think that when Maid first started in Canada, it's federally regulated, but then it was told every province has the right to administer it how they wish to. And so the minute you take anything and you put it into somebody else's hands, it's up to them to figure it out. And it was muddy. It was still very new. People were very scared to talk about it. There's a lot of pushback at that time about doctors wanting to participate, not wanting to participate. Nobody really knew what they were supposed to do. So the path that I got handed at the beginning of it was told that I had to do all of this myself, that I had to hire a nurse, I had to hire, get a psychological assessment, I had to I mean, I didn't actually have to hire any of that. It was actually completely, the process was already there in place. It was just me. I needed to find the right person to help navigate that process. So once it got going, it involved two doctors' assessments, so two individual assessments by doctors. We had some issues with the conscientious objection in there as well. So there is allowed that a doctor can say, I don't want to take part in this. So there were some difficulties being able to find people who would even have the conversation with us. And once that happened, and then they kind of took over and they took care of everything for us. And I was able to just be a daughter for the last 2 weeks of my mom's life. But those months prior to that, I was her maid team for
Wow.
everything that was happening. Yeah.
How many doctors did you have to go through before you found one that didn't give you so much pushback that they would, bow out of it?
I think we're probably close to five at
Oh
that
my
point.
God.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was really challenging. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And what about funeral arrangements? What does that look like when the person is living? How do you do that?
So that was an interesting conversation to have, to walk into a funeral home and say, my mother is going to be passing away on this day at this time. And they kind of sit there and they're like, oh. And, as you can, not all of us are so lucky to actually know the moment that we're going to die. So in some ways, it makes for a lot of easier planning than it does for deaths that are a bit more of a surprise. But it also makes for very uncomfortable situations and uncomfortable conversations because we were the first maid death in the funeral home as well. I have to say the funeral home was remarkable. Of all of the conversations I had, they were the most willing and understanding and caring about it. So, and I think again, because their job is death. And so when you have day to day conversations about dying, I think you're less afraid of the how of it and you're more concerned about the empathy part of it and understanding that somebody has just lost somebody that was very meaningful to them. And this was a death just like any other death. It just was facilitated in a different way.
I could see where a funeral home would probably be one of the stronger advocates that does kind of check out. What about psychological support? You didn't have to hire a psychologist to do an assessment. Was there any support through the process of making these decisions for your mom? The reason that I'm asking that is because when I think about if I'm putting myself mentally in your mom's shoes and I'm thinking like, I want my daughter to be my daughter and I don't want to overburden her, but I need someone to like talk to because this is happening and now I need to make decisions, which requires emotional energy. Was there support for her during that?
No, there wasn't. There wasn't for her and there wasn't for myself as well. There was no psychological support. And that's the reason why Bridge C14 became Bridge C14 was because of the process I went through, the before, during, and after of trying to navigate this with my mom and having nobody there. And, the process of going through dying, the death of a parent when it's cancer was really different for me when it was my dad than when it was my mom. Because again, it was, everybody's lost someone to cancer. So if you say that people show up in droves and there's marches and t-shirt and you can buy pink toilet paper and you feel represented everywhere you go. And then when it's made, nobody really talked about it then. It was very hush hush. Even I remember my conversation with my mom where she's like, just tell people I had a heart attack. And I was like, Mom, nobody's going to believe you had a heart attack. So I was like, we need to find a different story than that one if we're going to tell a story. So I feel like for me and for my mom, I think the most difficult part was the psychological part of it, of trying to figure out how to navigate this type of grief when there was no playbook for it. And it was all in the moment, trying to figure it out and doing it under such scrutiny as well, because every time you did bring it up, it was always met with judgment. Even still to this day, and it's been this many years later, 7 years later, still I bring it up and I can see the judgment that comes in people's eyes. And it was nervous even having this conversation with you, Meredith, about are people going to be listening empathetically, or are we going to run right to that land of finger pointing and finger waving?
I hope that my audience would lead with curiosity. That's kind of our trademark.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
I never know about the new people who have just joined the chat, but I can say that my audience, that's the deal. That's kind of the purpose of this show. And I think that's the special thing about podcasting, don't you? I mean, you're a
I do.
podcaster. It's the chance to do it. It's not regulated. It's not censored yet. I know there's some just new things that passed in Canada. It's our place. It's our place to have
Yeah.
the chat without
And
anybody interrupting us.
And I appreciate that because I think, again, it is a conversation that people do think about. And I'm sure that everybody at some point has crossed your mind of how much can I take before I want to tap out? And, and it's the tapping out part is for me, the biggest piece of bravery that my mom ever showed was tapping out, of saying that this is my limit and this is what I'm willing to go as far with. And this is where it's going to end. And I think it takes a lot of courage. It took a lot of courage on my end to do that process with her as well. But also, it opened a lot of doors up to support many other people who didn't have support that now have it because of that. I look at my mom's death a lot as like what came out of it, and I feel that her life was such a legacy, but her death also became one as well.
And I'm sure that was unexpected because the subject of death is taboo. And we don't even have great death rituals in North America. Funerals are a little theatrical. It's like, well, this is supposed to make us feel better, yet most of the time, funerals make no one feel better, yet we all act like, oh, that made me feel better. There's just the disconnect between what is happening inside and the honesty that is lacking in communicating about what's happening inside. And what I love about the story of your mom is she sounds like she was already a very honest woman, very upfront. And I see that in you. And it's like you're carrying that legacy forward and offering it to people. Not everyone's ready to take that gift, but it's out there for people to to receive.
Yes, and it is. I think that's like the good way to say it, right? There's an olive branch, and that's what I think the organization stands for. Is that we're just a hand, and so the hand is always extended, and you're there to hold it when you need it and to walk away from it when you don't need it. And it's just nice to know that there's a place to land while you're trying to navigate this process.
I'm surprised that there's still so much pushback even now. It's been what, 7 years?
Yeah, 7 years. Yes, yeah. I'm not overly surprised, to be honest with you. I think that it comes down to a lot of the time, a lot of sensationalism that surrounds Maid. And I think that TV has done a great disservice to it. There have been a lot of TV shows made in Canada that really try to put fear mongering in, and a lot of things of like Dr. Death showing up at the door with the needle in the bag, and, nobody really consenting or knowing what's going on. And we've also haven't had those open conversations about what the process is really like. So people automatically jump to this. It's putting someone to sleep the same way it is a dog. It shouldn't be our choice when we get to die. It's the choice of somebody higher than us. And they're all important conversations to have. But I think, again, at the end of the day, we are living our own life, and we have the right to be the authors of how we choose to end that book. And so Maid has been put there to help people who are very ill be able to have some choices during a time when they've been robbed of everything else. And that's the reason why it exists.
What are the legal guidelines that qualify a person to have a Maid death?
So there's quite a few that go into place with it. And again, like some of the big ones are they have to have a disease that is going to is terminal. So it's either, there's two ways you can look at it, that either it's going to be terminal, we know the death is coming, it's imminent, or it is going to be something that's going to be coming down the line when we know that there is no way that there's going to be a different outcome on this. And either people can then be able to opt in to have Maid now, or be able to say, I want Maid in the future when I've reached a certain stage of discomfort. And you can kind of, sign up, so to say, that this is what my exit strategy is down the road. But there's two doctors' assessments that need to be done during that time as well. So there are two individual doctors' assessments. You also have the right to be able to opt out of the process right up until the moment before the medications are administered. And also in Canada, no one's allowed to counsel you into Maid. So it isn't something that family members don't go and say, I think you should, explore Maid, or doctors don't say, I think you should explore Maid. It is a completely an autonomous decision, which makes it difficult if, again, you're not in a conversation with people where that word of mouth ability is there. So some of the smaller communities, it's much harder to know what is Maid, what's happening, because it isn't talked about so openly and so freely. And that's why with Bridge C14, why we've really focused on having that peer-to-peer connection, so peers can talk to each other and spread the word, very much through the grassroots movement of there are options for you. This is how you go through the process, and here's how to think about it. It isn't that it's right for everybody, but here's the thinking process if it's something you want to explore. So it's very tight. It's much tighter than people think it is. And like I said, for us, it was a 90-day process to go through. So it definitely can be faster for some people, but for us, it was really a long, long process with a lot of conversations about, are you sure this is really what you want to be doing? It's fully in the hands of the patient. It's not anyone else who's making that decision.
I read that there is some sort of psychological assessment in the approval process. I was wondering if you happen to know if someone had attempted to end their life prior to an illness diagnosis, would that disqualify them?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. Yeah. There's psychological process. I think what's there is really not, it's not a psychological assessment. I think the way that you're thinking it is, there is no checkbox where you sit down and say, here are the standard questions that are asked. With the psychological assessment that we went through, it was very much in the hands of the doctors, and it was asking from a standpoint of, are you cognitively capable of making this decision? That's what they're looking for. So have you been coerced in any way? Do
Uh,
you understand what this means? Like in the case with my mother, because of the fact that she was nonverbal at the time of her death, that also was, how can you verbally consent to something? So it was having to understand other ways for her to be able to express, this is what I want, in different languages, so that the doctors were clear that she is very right of mind to make this decision. That's what they're looking for more than anything else. It isn't a, you answered so many checks in A, therefore you get approved, and you only hit C's, so you're not approved. It's much more holistic than that. Yeah.
yes, that was what I was thinking of, the
Yeah.
like, are you having sad thoughts? Kind of like, are you able to make this decision on your own and no one is persuading you? How does the bill prevent medical tourism?
You have to be a Canadian citizen in order to be able to get access to Maid. So that immediately is, the medical tourism is not something that, I don't ever really anticipate that will be something we see in Canada. I could be wrong, but it's right now you need to be a citizen in order to be able to access Maid.
I mean, I think when you talk about autonomy and you talk about the ability to kind of design your exit strategy, you want to be in your own country. You want to be, with your family. You want to design it as best as you can. And so I could see where people would, in a perfect world, they would have a similar type of bill in their country of origin, that they wouldn't have to leave and go do that. I wanted to ask you about an important topic regarding suicide versus medically assisted death, because I'm wondering how they're marking the death in the coroner's office, what the death certificate looks like. But aside from paperwork, I'm also curious about just what that looks like on a societal level when you are trying to remember your mom in a social setting, and
Mhm.
you bring it up, and maybe it's somebody new, and then they ask, how did she die? And these are all the details that I think wear people down and emotionally, and that they're also afraid to ask, and if they have the courage, there's no one to ask them to.
Yeah, so it's a really great question. And I think this is probably one of the hot topics or the hot buttons within the Maid community is Maid versus suicide. And I know that many people will hear it and think, well, it is suicide. But for those of us have come through it, we don't view it as that. We view it as a medical procedure, which is what it is. There's two ways to be able to receive Maid in Canada, and one is through self-administration and the other is through physician administration. And it's medicine that you receive is what it is. So it's a medically assisted death. And I think the suicide component of it. So when my mother she had her death certificate, it was listed as suicide on there. And it's one of the things that I fought forever was to get that changed at the time. It now isn't listed that way. Now it's listed as a Maid death, a medically assisted death. And I think for those of us who are left behind, I think for us it's an important note to what it is that this is again a decision that was made, most hopefully not all the time, but with the support of family, that this is not somebody who has felt isolated and is doing something out of desperation, but doing something out of thought and logic, and again assisted throughout the entire process to make a decision that's right for them and for their family as well at the same time. And so there's the suicide component comes up a lot. It is mentioned a lot. I told you a story offline about even myself that I had an employer sit down and say to me, he found out about my mom and bring me into his office, and he lectured me for an hour about suicide and this and that and the other thing. And I kept saying, I'm going to leave. We are not relevant to my job. But they felt just that they had to get their opinion out about it. And I think that that's the piece that holds a lot of us back from talking, is that we worry about what's going to be said on the other end of it, because there always seems to be this level of education that needs to go along with our grief. So I can't just walk into grieving and say, my mom died. I have to say, well, my mom passed away, yes, but it was from a medical assisted death, but she had this other disease. And no, it doesn't happen this way, it happens this way. And these are all the things I had to do before you get to the conversation of someone saying, I'm really sorry. And so it's different again that, I always said when my father died, I felt like, supported. And when my mother died, I felt responsible. And there was a very different process in that dying process because of the fact that there was so much on my plate versus that shouldn't have been, first of all, but also there's always that level of guard that goes up when you try to talk about it because you don't know how someone else is going to react. And nobody's going to react negatively to somebody you lost a loved one to cancer, but they will react negatively to, oh, they chose to leave on their own terms. So I'm always a little cautious about how I bring it up. And I look forward to not having to be, but still I'm always a little bit cautious about it.
Yeah. Well, how are you supposed to heal if you can't be vulnerable? And you can't be vulnerable when you have to defend yourself, educate them, I mean, I'm sure the part of you that wants people to have options, wants everyone to know about it, but not at the expense of your emotional wellness.
No, and even when I went to counseling, and I'm very open about counseling, I think counseling is something that's so good for everyone's soul, and we should always find a place to be able to do that. And I spent a lot of time, I spent a year actually in counseling after I lost my mom, and trying to find a counselor also was another process because I ended up having a friend call and screen for me because I had so many people who refused to see me because of the fact that it was Maid that we were going to be discussing, and they didn't agree or support it. And then finally, when I did get somebody, again, it was that education process that had to go into place of saying, this is what happened and this is all the things you need to know before I can even start to unpack my own feelings about it. So we're always, I think, a little bit in that world of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the grief world, where it's just not quite the same as everybody else. And so that's why Bridge C14 became so important to me to create a safe place where people could openly grieve about what it was like for them because everyone's situations are so remarkably different. Some families have wonderful experiences and they're supported right to the end, and it really is a celebration of living and dying. And other families have had very horrible experiences that have left them feeling broken at the end of it. And none of us should have to navigate our grief with that extra thing on our shoulders. So for me, the organization was really about understanding how to give the right things before, during, and after to make sure that the people who are left here also know how to be able to move forward.
Wow, wow, I cannot believe that you had counselors turn you away. That's insanity because, as I understand it, if a pedophile needs mental health counseling, he's going to get it. But they wouldn't give you mental health counseling for supporting your mom. And here's the other thing, how many control freaks do you know? A lot. Like, I'm in a lot of them, right? Like, I love just kind of knowing what's going to happen. It's kind of nice. But then there's this exceptional area, the area that, oh, you wanting to be in control and make decisions and have freedom and rights. Nope, not in this area. It's wild, isn't it? It's so wild. But I think you hit the heart of it at the beginning of our discussion when you were like, it's really not about the death, it's about your life. It's about looking at your life through the lens of it's finite. It's not going to be forever. And having your head in the sand is the default, unfortunately. And the Maid process is the exact opposite. And it's that honesty, looking at your own life and in relationship to those around you. That's probably where people get stuck.
It's scary to think about dying. Like, I think all of us can say that. And I've gone through this process, and I said to my husband, I was like, oh, I don't want to put our daughter through what I went through ever. And at the same time, I also know that I would want to go through that process with her because there was a lot of beauty that I found in it with my mom. But when we're alive and we're in that day-to-day moment of just getting by, right? We're getting by every day and we're just trying to get to the retirement years. And then we get to the retirement years and we're trying to get to the fun years of we can travel now and we can do all of these things. And many of us don't think about our deaths until much further down. And we think that death is going to be something that will greet us in our 90s. And by then we've done everything. And most people, we don't get there. We don't. We die younger, we die sooner. And that's frightening because, again, our checklists aren't done. So we have that thing to say, well, it's too soon for me to go because I still have this, this, and this. The bucket list has not been completed. And I think that many of the people I have met who walked into the Maid, or the ones I've met, the families I've met who've gone through the Maid process where their loved ones were very at peace with the decision. My mother was. She was very at peace with the decision she made. were people who felt very good about the things they had done in their life. That they were like, my mom even said to me, she's like, I lived enough. There's nothing left that I want to do. Like, I've lived enough. And hearing someone say that with that sense of courage and conviction, it makes you question your own decisions during when you're living, right? Like, how am I really living the life that I truly want to be living? So when it does come to be my time, I can make the decision to step out without regrets. And that's a much harder discussion to have with yourself than it is to say, how do I want to die? Is how do I want to live?
And how has that discussion gone with yourself? Have you changed anything about your life or the way that you make decisions since the Maid process?
100%. 100%. Yes, absolutely. I feel that one of the biggest changes, I said a lot of the time to my husband jokingly, I'm like, I think my mother's actually inside of me since this process has happened because I just don't have time to waste anymore. That's how I view it. I look at doing things in life based on what I really want to do. I take risks in ways I never would have before. I try to work really hard to find joyful moments so that when it is time for me to be able to make a decision, I don't have regrets. Like, maybe I didn't get to Paris, but I won't regret that I didn't spend enough time with my daughter, or that I didn't love my husband enough, or I didn't have friends that really mattered to me. And those are the things that matter the most. It's not going to be necessarily like who shows up at our funeral or how we end up meeting our maker. It's going to be, what did we do when we were alive to make an impact on the people around us in a positive way, so that our legacy is carried forward in their memory and their hearts. Because that is what living comes down to, is it stays in your head and it stays in your heart. That's a true, for me, the scorecard of living a remarkable life, is that people talk about you after you're not here.
And there are different ways that we keep the dead with us in our lives, right? And that's another life change that I've noticed, that people who have situations that are maybe adjacent to yours, that instead of never bringing that person up, like, they're a part of our daily lives in a different way, in a way that I think most people in North America don't participate in. In other countries, they have different traditions where the dead are part of the dinner table place setting, for example. How how have you included your mom in your living since her death?
So she is very much in the day to day of our life and the conversations. And when mom passed away in October, and she asked me to wait to bury her on Mother's Day. And so I did. It was the last of the honors that all the things she asked me. I was like, I'm going to go right down the line, Mom, and listen to this and do what you're asking. And a week later, I got pregnant with my daughter. And I always have been convinced since then that that was my thank you from my mom. So having her with no grandparents has been challenging, because most children are raised differently. So for us, we've actually included my mom in the storytelling right from the beginning. So when we brought our daughter home from the hospital, my mom, there's a big portrait of her over her crib. It's still over her bed to this day, 5 years later. We tell stories all the time about her. We talk to the school about it as well. We've had open discussions about, when we're doing family lessons, we want you to talk about the fact that there's different versions of families. Some people's families are alive, some people's families are in heaven. We're a different story for that. So we've tried to normalize it as much as possible in every aspect of what we've done. In my day to day, I have a tattoo on my arm that I got in memory. It's my mother's garden. And it's like her full garden, because my best memories of her with her were spent in the garden with our fingers in dirt, and then traveling the world together, because we love to travel, and we drank scotch together. And so all of these little moments, like, I feel it's like a daily celebration where she's yes, I can't see her and she's not physically here, but she is very deeply ingrained in our life. And my daughter feels as though she's met her. She has conversations with her all the time that, Nanny said this to me and Nanny said that.
Oh
She
my
said something. I'll tell you,
gosh.
this is an aside. This will be your heart moment here for this. When she was about 3 years old, I was sitting thinking about my mom, and I was feeling really, really sad. And this little hand touched my arm, and she said, Mommy, Nanny told me to tell you that she sent me down from heaven because she knew you'd be lonely. And that's why I'm here. So you'll never have to be lonely again. And I was like, well, damn it if that's not a tearjerker, isn't it? So it's just, I think my heart's been so open because of going through the Maid process that I'm just willing to take in every aspect of it and just not feel shame about it. It's just my journey was just a different journey than other people's was. But it's at the end of the day, I love my mom the same way that anybody's listeners or your listeners are loving their parents or their brother or their husband or their child. And I was just lucky enough to be put there for her during that time to help her have the death that she truly wanted to have.
Wow. Well, as we wrap up, can you tell how Bridge C14 gives the support that you didn't give? What does that look like? Because the peer-to-peer model with adults, I don't think it's not as familiar. We think of peer-to-peer as being student. So can you paint a picture of what that support looks and feels like for those that can interact with your organization?
Absolutely. So Bridge C14 helps people before, during, and after the Maid process. And that's for people who are living, those of us who have been left behind, and also for people who have requested the process. So it acts as an opportunity to really facilitate grief differently, to be able to have somebody there with you during that process, to be able to bounce feelings and emotions. A lot of the things we talked about earlier that I struggled with, if there was no one to talk to, it's a safe place to talk. It's a safe place to get a peer to help you navigate the paperwork because there's a lot of paperwork. It's a safe place to help navigate conversations with funeral homes. And it's also a safe place for people who want to explore Maid to do it in a non-judgmental way. And so we do everything from meetups and face to face to meetups that happen through virtually. We have a podcast as well. We have like training workshops. Our CEO, Lauren, she is a remarkable woman. I love her to death, Lauren Clark, and she runs the organization. And she also does trainings across the country for facilitators, for doulas, death doulas, just trying to level the landscape a bit so that we have less stigma when it comes to Maid and more opportunities for people to feel as though they were heard, seen, and respected during the process.
I love that. How can people find the organization? Is there a cost associated with it? What's kind of the first step for someone that wants to reach out?
First step would just be go to bridgec14.org and you can follow all our resources there. There is no cost to be part of the program. It's all donor funded. Everything we do comes through donations. So if you'd like to make one, we would love you very much. If you did, you get an awful lot of love from us. But it really is an organization that's just there to be able to say, whenever you want to walk through our doors, we're willing to accept you and we'll find a place for you that's best suited. So start with the website and everything is there resource wise so you can navigate it from there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your story. I I'm glad to be a part of letting people know about this. It feels important and I'm glad that we could do it in this way that allows people to engage with it conversationally, engage with a real person. I think that hearing people's stories is the true key to honest to goodness transformation. That you can read about things online, you can have an opinion about anything, but when you meet someone who has been through it, that's where real impact happens. And so I appreciate your willingness to make an impact with me today. That it means a lot.
I appreciate being here and you know how much I care about you. So I just feel very honored that I've been able to be part of this conversation and I'm grateful to everyone who's just listening. And even if it's just a little bit more of an open mind about it, it's just, we all want to be loved at all stages of our life. So that's all to me what Maid is just the ultimate love that you can give to somebody on their way out.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you.